But on the next slide, you can see, of course, we know that the recently passed federal tax plan is contributing to many of the trends that we are seeing in the states because that enormously expensive federal tax and budget bill that includes over $4 trillion in tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit the richest Americans. We know that's being paid for through measures that harm our families and cloud their futures. And so while nearly half of the benefits of these cuts go mostly to just the top 5%, the budget cuts you can see there on the slide that were made to pay for those will be felt by the vast majority of residents through harms that include millions losing access to health care and food assistance, increased healthcare costs, education early childhood cuts, and then, of course, major holes in state budgets due to program cuts and cost shifting and decreases in federal funding. On the next slide, you could see it, and I've gone through this slide before, but you can see that these cuts and cost shifting measures that are now being coupled with personally and politically punitive and vindictive funding freezes loom so large because on average about a third of a typical state budget comes from federal funding. And so as we all know, these major federal cuts put states into a pretty precarious position when they're already facing major pressures. You can see there inflation remains high and growing, recession threats continue to increase, with every wave of layoffs or trade war or international aggression. And then state COVID era tax cuts that many states gave away when states were flush in those COVID and post-COVID years, those are going into effect, tightening available resources. And so a major trend in state taxes this year that many states will face budget shortfalls, but absolutely all states will shoulder more responsibility for paying for the key programs during a time when communities are really in critical need. And if states don't step up, the results could be dire for our families and our kids. On the next slide, you can see states, though, the positive, if there is one, is that states are unique labs of innovation and they have power to determine their own pathways and are considering responding to these pressures in a number of different ways. And we're looking to late summer and fall 2025 trends for hints about what those reactions may be. So you can see there, fall 2025 special sessions may be telling because more than a dozen states passed measures to shore up revenues and protect programs and families. Governors and state lawmakers pushed back on federal outreach. Corporate tax cuts were defeated in some unexpected places, including in Nevada, where you'll hear from Andrew in a bit. States spent money to shore up key safety net programs in the face of federal cuts, like in my home state of New Mexico. And more than 10 states decoupled parts of their tax code. They separated parts of their tax code from the federal tax code in order to avoid federal changes that would threaten state revenues. And then, you can see there, but November 2025 elections could also be telling. We saw anti-Trump candidates sweep some major state and local races, including governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, and the mayoral race, of course, in New York City. And then maybe not as glossy or headline grabbing, but incredibly important down ballot race wins as well. Voters in California approved a new congressional map. Pennsylvania retained key Supreme Court justices. In Maine, voters rejected a ballot measure that would have restricted voting access. And though not wins, there were some other races that were much, much closer than expected in really tough districts, including for Afton Bain, who's a state representative who ran on revenue messaging in Tennessee and nearly won a congressional seat in that state. So really interesting trends that we're looking at. And then as we move forward on the next slide, you can see that tax movement trends continue to be positive as the movement grows in size and strength, with more and more diverse groups coming into the space, especially from grassroots and labor organizations and networks that are coming into the tax movement, and we're lucky to be engaged with every week. And that's happening as those connections between tax, justice, and democracy, taxes and education and care, taxes and health and the environment, taxes and all the issues that we collectively care about have never been more clear. And the fact that federal harms have come to our communities in a real and present, devastating, and authoritarian way is something that cannot be ignored. And in this moment of crisis and resistance, tax movement members are helping to drive and evolve and stoke narratives, not just on tax justice, but on its ties to extreme wealth and racial injustice and corporate corruption, democracy. And on the flip side, they're the ones who are envisioning a better funded future that is driven by love and care for our families and for our communities. And you can see on the next slide there are some positive state policymaker and legislative trends as well. We continue to see an increase in the number of progressive state tax bills that are being introduced by an ever increasing number of state legislative sponsors. State lawmakers are pushing back more vocally on tax cuts that put the interests of billionaires over the needs of families. And while state legislators are historically the strongest policymaker tax champions in the states, we're actually seeing more governors vocally push these issues in some notable cases, including in Delaware, you can see there, or Washington, Rhode Island. And this weird and wild time has also made for some unlikely bedfellows when it comes to state tax issues. So lawmakers on both sides of the aisle advocating for revenue that maybe would have never come to the table before, and includes, probably folks saw Mitt Romney's op-ed in the New York Times. And then here I included a quote from a Republican finance and tax lead in South Carolina, talking about how South Carolina needs to make their tax code right for them, not for the feds, and they need to have the revenue to support the programs that are important for folks in South Carolina. So some interesting and some positive trends. On the next slide, you can see, though, as always, roadblocks remain. Sometimes major roadblocks remain, and we see some trends here too. Because while more lawmakers and groups have been emboldened to stand up for their communities, sometimes even those that are raising their voices the most vocally, the most loudly about federal overreach or for threats to their issues of interest, sometimes those same folks are not willing to push for better tax and revenue policies that do support all those programs. And then, of course, some bad tax ideas like income tax elimination, in places like Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, these bad ideas refuse to go away. And then, as always, stepping back, big picture, or the foundation in which we do this work, power, money, and reach of our collective opposition on tax issues. So, and our opposition is those that are representing the interests of the wealthy and the well-connected. Their power and money and reach is extensive and very well funded. And that's that's in the face of fear looming so large at this moment, so large by intention, by cultivation, by stoking. And so our sector, our allies, our partners, we all, we're all scared as family members and community members, as organizations, and scared because we know philanthropic partners are scared too. So there are some tough trends as well, but definitely some vibrant and optimistic ones. And you can see on the next slide. We also know the context that all these decisions are being made within is a big electoral season this year with major ramifications. So in 2026, you could see there, of course, congressional midterms are happening, but also 36 gubernatorial elections, 88 out of 99 state legislative chambers are up for election across 46 states. And then, of course, significant revenue measures on the ballot, some proactive, some defensive, in states like Michigan, California, Massachusetts, Missouri. And so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lily to dig in a little bit more about what these trends look like on the ground and across the states. And we'll be sharing these slides as well. But take it away, Lily.
Awesome. Hey all, Lily Lanier, she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Campaigns Director here at State Revenue Alliance. And I'm going to give just a quick overview of some of the bill trends that we're hearing heading into the 2026 session, touching on over 50 proactive tax equity bills. And so if you go forward 2 slides, I want to start on high earners income taxes, which is a space we're seeing quite a few partners running bills this session. Some are running explicit millionaires taxes, like Maine, for example, which is pushing a 2% tax on income over 1 million. Other states looking at millionaires taxes include Rhode Island, Virginia, Washington, and Vermont. Some states, like New York and New Jersey, are working to add multiple new tax brackets, targeting earners making multiples of millions. And similarly, Michigan is collecting signatures for a high earner surcharge on the November ballot, and California is eyeing an extension of Prop 55, which taxes income over $700,000 to fund education. On the next slide, wealth and capital gains taxes are another area seeing a lot of activity. Quite a few states are looking to pass a capital gains tax. New York, for example, is targeting a tax that would add a surcharge on gains over 500,000, which is estimated to raise $12 billion annually. On the explicit wealth tax side, both Washington and Rhode Island have plans to run a wealth tax, and Vermont is running a wealth tax bill study. And California, of course, is seeing signature collection for a billionaire tax on the ballot. On the next slide, a wealth proceeds tax is another area of interest for many states. We're anticipating as many as 6 states may introduce a wealth proceeds tax this session. As these are new bills this cycle for these states, we're going to let those states share those details themselves as they're finalized. But we're really excited about this as a legislative tool to continue to address disparities in wealth, specifically how passive income is currently taxed at a much lower rate than income generated from work. As most folks on the call know, ITEP recently released a report with the detailed look at a wealth proceeds tax, which is modeled off the federal net investment income tax and is a law that Minnesota led on passing in 2023 at the state level. Corporate taxes on the next slide are another common theme, with a few states running more than one corporate tax bill. Maine and New York are both eyeing increases in their top corporate income tax rate. And actually, as Ryan, who leads the Mainers for Tax Fairness Coalition, shared on State Revenue Alliance's 2025 legislative debrief this past summer, this Maine bill actually passed in both chambers last session, including with bipartisan support in the House. We're seeing ongoing efforts around GILTI, combined reporting, and worldwide combined reporting, as well as a variety of creative targeted corporate tax bills, like in Washington, where a high earners payroll tax would add a 5% tax on companies with high concentrations of employees earning more than $125,000 annually. On decoupling and conformity, on the next slide, as Amber mentioned earlier in the presentation, because many states conform to the federal tax code, they also face high risk of significant revenue losses as a result of federal tax changes. And therefore, decoupling from or addressing conformity to the federal tax code is a top priority for many states, as these tax code changes can save many millions of dollars. These provisions range from corporate tax provisions to income tax provisions, and a number of states have already taken steps to decouple, and many are eyeing further actions for 2026 and 2027. On early childhood funding and PN3 focused tax measures, child tax credits and earned income tax credits remain a priority for many states, as these are key opportunities to improve child and family well-being and increase equity in the tax code. A number of states are also looking specifically at their mechanisms for funding childcare and early childhood programs, and the recent New Mexico model has been an energizing example for many states. Lastly, on defending tax cuts on the next slide, despite so many deficits that so many states are facing as a result of the federal tax bill and the increased need to fund gaps in key programs, defending against harmful tax cuts or new corporate tax subsidies continues to be a consistent trend, regardless of the political makeup of states across the country. And so, for example, New Hampshire's legislative session kicked off with a House vote on a cut to the corporate business enterprise tax, a tax that has already been slashed by nearly 27% since 2015. And in their recent lame duck session, New Jersey faced a fast tracking of a few bills that would expand corporate development subsidies by roughly $3 billion. And so this last trend, while disappointing, transitions us perfectly to kick off our state spotlights, because we'll get to hear from a number of partners fighting back against these trends of tax cuts and corporate giveaways, as well as building a proactive vision for their states. And so first up, I'm excited to introduce Andrew Clark, who's the coalition director for the Nevada Revenue Coalition, who will share some of his lessons learned from Nevada's fall special session on film tax credit fight. So if we move to the next slide, Andrew, passing it to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Lily. I'm really happy to be here. State Revenue Alliance, this call is my Davos, so I'm just very happy. But moving it on to the next slide, please. Okay, there we go. So, Nevada is home to the Great Reno Balloon Race. It is the largest hot air balloon race in the world. It doesn't really affect our state budget, but it's just something fun to do. Elvis did perform 636 shows here in Las Vegas. That was paid into a 10% LET tax. Thank you so much to our legislators back in the 60s who passed that. Now, if you ever make the trek up from Las Vegas to Carson City, our capital, it's about a 6 hour drive. You pass through a small town named Tonopah. Tonopah, next to its old cemetery, is our clown motel. It's a motel themed after clowns. I really recommend to stay. It is ominous. However, going on to the bad news, we are unfortunately 48th in education. According to Wallet Hub, we are the fourth worst state to raise a family. And according to ITEP, we're the fifth most regressive tax code in the country, meaning that our lowest 20% of earners pay a 12.8% tax rate. Meanwhile, our 8,005 millionaires are paying a 2.8% tax rate. And here at the coalition, we're looking to change that. Next slide, please. So the Nevada legislature meets biennially, meaning we meet every 2 years for 120 days. So this legislative session was our coalition's first time having a dedicated staffer, myself. Going into that, we had two priority bills, ending property tax depreciation at point of sale. According to our Legislative Council Bureau, the state of Nevada loses roughly 1.2 billion every decade due to this depreciation. We have a fun little graphic there at the bottom. Essentially, you have properties that were built in the 50s paying much less in property tax. It doesn't matter if that house was demolished and there's a new mega mansion. In some cases, there are. They will sometimes pay 400 to 800 bucks in property tax. Meanwhile, if you're a new KB home, you're paying much more in property tax. Only state to do this. We wanted to join our friends in Virginia, New Jersey, Texas in having digital sales tax. This was the third session this bill's ever been brought. We still need to make more headway, but I am very proud to announce this was the first time it was ever voted out of committee. It's never made out of committee before. It's only the second time it ever got a hearing. Our May Economic Forum projected a $351 million shortfall. That is not even tied to the one big beautiful bill. Tourism is down. Nevada students were giving a $2 per pupil increase after the Commission on School Funding found that we are $4,000 behind the national average. $2 Joe Lombardo, as we like to call our governor, unfortunately, was only willing to cough that much up. Now, AFSCME 4041 fought very hard for a fair increase to their members this session. An arbitrator found they deserved a 3% raise, considering that groceries are up almost 30%. They were only given a 1% raise. And this was the marquee bill of the session. It was supported by all of the Assembly leadership, AB 238, which is $120 million per year in transferable tax credits to Warner Brothers and Sony over the course of 15 years. That's 1.8 billion. Died on bill deadline day. And I suffice to say, we're very happy. Next slide, please. How I spent my summer vacation. So we just got this huge win during the legislative session. We beat something that no one told us that we could beat. We were looking at new ways to focus on the ITEP report on ways we can change the revenue system in Nevada. I even looked at opening a lemonade stand to get some more actual sales tax revenue into the state. We are really throwing everything at the wall. Unfortunately, as we were looking to celebrate our summer vacation, the movie studios, as well as proponents of the bill, were organizing, making phone calls to legislators, getting on board the governor, who became an ardent supporter, as well as the Senate Majority Leader, who also became a major supporter of this bill. And they planned an entire special session around bringing back AB 238, the film tax credit bill. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, according to the Fair Share Impact Research, due to the One Big Beautiful Bill, Nevada is set to lose 9.5 billion over the next decade. 265,000 of our neighbors, friends, students, veterans will have food taken off the table if something is not done. 114,500 people in our state are set to lose access to Medicare, Medicaid. We have rural hospitals out in Tonopah and Elko and Mesquite that are at risk of closure. 31,000 jobs are being lost due to the clean energy cuts. It is genuinely the biggest issue the state is facing right now. And on the other hand, because of tariffs and trade wars, we are losing tourists. One of our biggest revenue generators, funny enough, here in Las Vegas is Canadian tourism. And now we have boycotts on travel to the United States. So that is a huge hole in the budget. That is the majority of reason they predicted we were going to lose $351 million is due to the fact that tourists from Canada are not coming here in Las Vegas. And I think part of that goes into what we're trying to fight for. But unfortunately, as I'm sure some of you might see over the next year, your opponents will try to use that messaging to get wins for themselves. Next slide, please. So proponents messaging. So proponents literally took what is happening to the one big beautiful bill and these tourist cuts and pretty much changed their entire messaging. It was no longer about building a movie studio. It was, as you can see, jobs, jobs, jobs. It was in all their messaging. It was in their mailers. They started the Nevada Jobs Now PAC. Our legislative allies were sent mailers basically saying you're against jobs to constituents. Call your legislator to say, stop hating jobs. Like that is what the messaging was. The economic shot in the arm Nevada needs. And also just frankly, fake jobs numbers. We knew what the economic impact statements actually read. We knew what the state analysis looked like. This was going to be a 23-cent return on investment for every dollar invested. We knew what they were promising was false, but that didn't stop proponents from constantly hammering that message. So next slide, please. So tools we utilize. So the good news when you have messaging like that and you have fiscal impact that is so implicit and clear, you can make your messaging around that. So this summer I read genuinely about 1,000 pages of state audits, Maryland, Georgia, New Mexico. We took all the arguments they were making about tourism, about economic impact, about jobs, and we were literally able to find out in every state this has been promised, and in every state this has been untrue. We're able to successfully use state audits to message to legislators and make toolkits. Earned media hits. There was a point that all of the major Sunday papers in Las Vegas and Reno had an op-ed published in the physical Sunday paper, which is the best day of visibility and put online. We did an AVE, meaning the advertising value equivalent of $2.8 million that we earned through op-eds and press conferences. Letter sign-on campaigns for partners. We had partners that are a little more nonpartisan in the children's advocacy space, in foster care, in homeless assistance that signed on to our letters and got board approval. And reaching out to on-the-ground advocates, genuinely Marvin Lim in Georgia, New Mexico Voices for Children was great. Reinventing Albany. They lost some Republican votes on this bill due to Reinventing Albany research that New York was subsidizing SNL and Republicans in this state did not like that. So genuinely, this cohort really helped us. So next slide, please. Media hits, as you can see, we try to pretty much cover the airways. We did one webinar with Representative Lim from Georgia, as well as Senator Robin Titus, a Republican, and one Democrat, Nathan Anderson. That was covered in every single local media and the evening news and the nighttime news. We really did our best to make sure everyone was seeing this messaging. Next slide, please. So, lessons learned. Don't be afraid to draw a red line. Carson City culture is based around deal making and selling out your values. There were so many times that we were told, we might be able to help your organization with funders. We might be able to, if you guys are trying to ban price gouging and medication, we can get you something next session. We drew a red line as this was a non-negotiable. Galvanize those most affected. I think part of this coalition building is, as much as I would like to say the tax justice advocacy should be the end all be all, getting those children's advocates that are most affected, getting our state employees and our educators who we knew would face budget cuts due to this bill, getting them out to testify, getting them out to be the vocal opposition is extremely transformative. Incorporate community organizing and lobbying. I think it's like peanut butter and jelly. You can't have one without the other. I think sometimes strategies lean too much on one. By power mapping legislators and doing town halls, we were able to do the pressure in all the right ways. We're not in this alone. I could not have done this without the State Revenue Alliance cohort, the Fair Share cohort, like having our national partners and this information giving back to us made our work a million times easier. The state resources to respond to the federal tax bill, I put that in there just because a lot of our op-eds and messaging was based on information SRA accumulated for us to explain the harms of the federal bill, so we couldn't afford giving more state funds away. Bad fiscal reality should inform political realities. I think supporters really focus on manifest destiny, like they are the winning political argument, and we are able to use a bad fiscal reality to inform the political reality. Be relentless messengers, and the federal tax shift is genuinely changing the narrative for state fiscal fights. We message it like they were doing a one big beautiful bill of their own, and it is something that really resonated. Next slide, please. Work ahead. I think here in the state of Nevada, fatalism around massive corporate subsidies has been challenged from the Tesla Gigafactory to the A's Stadium to the Raiders Stadium. I think we are now building out the opposition to challenge future deals, and proponents are now a little more on edge to think that they are in for hard fights. The narrative around revenue and progressives has shifted in Carson City. Budget cuts are starting to be seen as more of a red line, and we really saw that in our film tax credit fight. Our work has been reinvigorated. We're trying to reimagine a budget that really defends everyday Nevadans, not attacks them. Transferable tax credits are money taken out of people's pockets. And to leave you all with this, I truly think the path of prosperity for tax justice advocates in the state is paved on well-funded capital improvements projects that also bring a positive return on investment back to the state. And next slide, please. And then, in the words of Porky Pig, we were not able to give him $1.8 billion. However, that is all, folks. And Mark Wahlberg is trying to bring it back, but we'll be here to stop him next time. And thanks, SRA, for letting me present this.
Andrew, amazing. Thank you so much. Pleasure to hear about the really impressive work in Nevada that you and your partners led this session and all the many components of it. And also appreciate your notes about this network and how many of the folks on this call as state partners sharing their lessons learned, sharing their resources helps like spread our wealth of knowledge and resources at times when I know folks are really in the thick of it in their own legislative fights. Andrew, thank you. And next up, I'm excited to introduce Nadeska Concha, who is the communications director for Florida for All, who will share with us a little bit about Florida's current corporate tax accountability and narrative work, and some of the property tax fight that they're in currently. So welcome, Nadeska.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lily, and thanks, Andrew. I think there's a lot of parallels from what you said, which is always interesting to pick up on. But yeah, my name is Naleska. I'm the communications director for Florida for All. The quick spiel about Florida for All that I think is relevant for this group here is that we are a coalition of grassroots organizations across the state. So across our different organizations, there's a lot of different issues, from housing to immigration to healthcare to labor. So as a coalition space, we were like, okay, what is the through line that's connecting all these different issues? And of course, it was billionaires and corporations hoarding our wealth, trying to control working people. So very naturally, revenue kind of became like both a container and a lens through which we see the work. That's also been super helpful for alignment. So I just want to preface this by saying I'm going to be coming at this from a slightly different angle, more from like the narrative and the coalition building pieces that are necessary to tax strategy. And big shout out to Esteban from Florida Policy Institute, who's on the call but unable to present. He's my policy brain, so if you have any policy questions, Esteban is your guy. Okay, so I did want to start the story here. July 2025, the governor of Florida chose to open a makeshift detention camp in the middle of the Everglades. There is a lot that I can say on this topic, but the part that I want to focus on for this group here is what's laid out on this slide that became very central to our strategy. Another big shout out to our friends at Florida Watch, who ran this poll in July of 2025, right after it opened. And we basically saw that when it came to favorability, individual opinions were a little bit divided. There were 34% of Floridians in favor, 43% not in favor. However, when the question was reframed and included the fact that the camp was being paid for out of Florida's taxpayer-funded Emergency Preparedness and Response Fund, we saw a significant increase in that disapproval rate, up to 59%. So that's nearly 3 out of 5 Floridians opposing this camp and how it was being paid. So we were like, okay, the more that we talk about the fact that it's taxpayer disaster funds that are paying for the detention of our neighbors and calling out who's profiting from it, the more likely we are to bring people into our vision of the world, establish our own emerging narratives when it comes to taxes, and ultimately keep our community safe and fully funded. So I won't go too in detail here, but I wanted to share that when we crafted our immigration narrative strategy in this moment, we also very intentionally centered corporate accountability. So pillar one, villainizing these CEOs for what they do and take at our expense, and also tax and budget advocacy as very central to the fight, because we knew at this point that the majority of Floridians agreed that our hard-earned taxpayer money should be funding the things that we care about that give us freedom and not the luxury lifestyle of a CEO profiting from perjury. So this is what led us to create this campaign, the Our Cash campaign, targeting husband and wife duo Carlos Duarte and Tina Vidal Duarte based in Miami. We did some research and found that they had been profiting from taxpayer-funded no-bid contracts for years, like textbook disaster capitalists. And this was being made possible by this immigration state of emergency that DeSantis put in place that was allowing him to give away our taxpayer dollars with zero accountability, zero transparency, and ultimately higher costs for us. So what was really important for us here that I want to emphasize is the trade-off in our messaging. We really wanted to make sure that this contrast of our tax dollars should be rebuilding our homes after a storm, not paying for their waterfront condos, right? Our tax dollars should get us there faster, not fund their private jets. So we used a series of tactics to put out this message. We did paid advertisements. We did a direct action. There were these posters that randomly showed up all over the city covering up Spotify ads. I don't know how that happened, but it happened. And we took our audience along this kind of narrative crescendo, with the resolution being that the Miami mayor removed their company from this pre-qualified vendor pool that was giving them easy access to our taxpayer dollars. So kind of like one of our main taglines throughout this was, this is about taking control of our money, our communities, and our futures. So what I want to share here that's been really cool through this campaign is seeing how when it comes to coalition building, this kind of project, we're able to bring people that were typically more in the immigration space into the tax and budget space, and people that were in the tax and budget space into the immigration space. So again, just like revenue being such an excellent tool for alignment. Which brings me to our current, one of our current legislative priorities. Let's see if I'm able to play this.
That part.
Oh, hell no.
That part.
I don't understand. I can't compute.
There's no
My brain is like, carry the 5, divide by 3, minus 4. Makes no sense. Like, what?
So that's how we feel about that. When it comes to these Republican-led proposals to eliminate property tax in Florida, the math is simply not mathing. And something that Esteban, that I mentioned at the top of the presentation, has done a great job in doing is grounding us in the history of property taxes in Florida. Because when you look back, this fight has been kind of cyclical in nature. We have these articles, the one on the top being from 1976, the one on the bottom being from 2006, with very similar dominant narratives around taxes that have been super pervasive. But if we look at where we're at now in 2026, these are headlines from the last year or so, and we see things like DeSantis' proposal is dangerous, be very wary, would devastate local schools. So these headlines themselves, I think, can be a testament to the fact that we have been doing something right, and there has been a narrative shift when it comes to property taxes in our state. I did want to share a summary of the property tax bills proposed by House Republican leadership that are currently moving through our 2026 legislative session. We're in the thick of it right now. We actually saw a few of these in committee today. And just to be clear, these are House joint resolutions, meaning that technically any of these that get 60% or more of approval from the legislature would then be put on the 2026 ballot to be approved by Florida voters. So we have these multiple proposals, each with like their own flavor of how property taxes should be eliminated, many of them in contradiction with one another, but all with the potential to go on the 2026 ballot. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to say it like this. They are literally throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like there is no plan. But something that I think is important to note here is that we've already kind of forced them to pivot on many fronts. For example, just moving from a complete property tax elimination to then limiting the scope to homestead properties is one. When they realized that there was a concern with public schools, they made sure to add language around non-school taxes. And they've also accepted these amendments to keep police departments, fire, and other emergency responder budgets the same, which is laughable, honestly. And we've been kind of trying to hammer this point because essentially these quote unquote protections are unfunded mandates, right? Because budgeting 101, if you cut a significant revenue stream, like, how are you going to pay for this? So yeah, at the end of the day, these proposals are inevitably going to shift the burden more onto working families in Florida. So our little property tax crew has been working on this narrative strategy guide that I'd be very happy to share with groups here. I know, unfortunately, these kind of stuff is popping up all over the country, so maybe it'd be useful for other groups to have. But I wanted to share like kind of how we're orienting ourselves around this, because even though we are preparing Floridians to vote no on the elimination of property taxes, we also want to make sure that we're reframing the debate to make it about the broader failure of Republican leadership on issues of affordability, because we know that that's the conversation that they do not want to be having, especially when it comes to property insurance in Florida. This is also a moment that really requires proactive, progressive tax reform. Florida is #1 most regressive tax system in the country. So all while these corporations are rigging the rules and evading responsibility to line their own pockets. We know that when we make them pay what they owe, we can fully fund the things that we need. That's something that we have our people repeat over and over again. And I also wanted to emphasize what's in this box here. This is also something that Esteban kind of grounded us in. There was a moment earlier in the year where it just felt like there was a lot going on. And there was a moment where even myself, I was like, why are property taxes even relevant at this point, right? When all this stuff is happening. But then we realized like, this is what they want us to feel, right? Like there is a reason why we started this work and why it's important, because ultimately this property tax fight is an attack on local communities and public sector workers led by a handful of politicians that want to consolidate their power and unleash military force on anyone that disagrees with their agenda. So I know that's been very kind of helpful for me to continue referring back to and like steadfast on why we embarked on this journey. I won't go too in detail, but I think it's also helpful the way that we've kind of laid out the different narratives that are moving in our state, the dominant narratives being the ones that we wanted to disrupt, the emerging ones being the ones that we wanted to disseminate and build. So for example, the one that has been super prominent is like, we've been seeing all these different actors and organizations showing up, testifying, going to committee, and kind of like thinking that we have to fight over these crumbs, right? Like they're making us feel like, oh, resources are scarce. Like we have to fight over this like one piece of the pie. When in reality, like that is, we need to reframe that thinking altogether, right? Again, we can all have what we need when they pay what they owe. This like mindset of abundance. All kind of underpinned by these core values of safety, stability, responsibility, and local freedom. Again, I won't go too in detail here, but again, big shout out to our partners at Florida Watch. They've done a lot of amazing research when it comes to property taxes that probably would be relevant for other states as well. For example, we know that even though it has a broad appeal, we know that it can be shifted with the right messaging. We know that Floridians really care about a lot of these services that will be defunded if we eliminate property taxes, and voters want practical solutions. So some examples of those solutions that we've been proposing are state rebates, like a working Floridians tax rebate, a circuit breaker program that offers targeted relief, and closing corporate income tax holes. We actually did a super fun report last year on combined reporting that we called The Feast. It kind of used this like opulent feast imagery. It was giving French Revolution. There were some guillotine references. And we did a press conference with our tax queen, Rep. Ana Escamani, that I wanted to make sure to highlight here. Just these are kind of like some call to actions that we're circulating throughout the coalition of some proactive policies that we're supporting along with opposing all the property tax bills. There's a really interesting bill from Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith that actually stopped that abuse of power of the state emergencies that I mentioned in the beginning. that people like Carlos and Tina have taken advantage of to receive our taxpayer dollars. And just to finish, these are kind of like our key takeaways when it comes to property tax. Eliminating property taxes is just a cost shift, and there are better ways to offer relief, and we can do so by fixing our upside down tax code. And I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Nadeska, amazing. Thank you so much. What you all are doing and like telling the story of our taxes and how they relate to like the funding of detention centers and the lining of like millionaires and billionaires' pockets and like a clear narrative on power and what's possible is really, really incredible. And also the design work on the R cache and the feast report is also like a sense of play and fun amidst really hard work is noticed and appreciated. Last up, I'm excited to introduce Will White from Hawaii, who's the executive director of Hawaii Appleseed, who will share with us about some of Hawaii's proactive plans for the 2026 session. So passing it to you, Will.
Great. Thank you, Lily. Aloha and good morning from Honolulu, everyone. Good afternoon to the folks on the East Coast. Very happy to be here with you. Once again, my name is Will White. I'm the Executive Director for Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. We are a nonprofit research and advocacy organization focused on the issues of affordable housing, food security, transportation equity, and budget and taxation. Before I get into where we are in the current landscape, the current tax policy landscape in Hawaii, just want to share some broader context with you all around how Hawaii's tax code is structured currently. Essentially, our tax code is very regressive. That's due in large part to the fact that about half of the revenues that are funding our budget right now come from a flat tax that operates like a sales tax. It's called the general excise tax. This tax is levied on any sort of transaction of money. So every time you go shopping at the grocery store, anytime you get a haircut, anytime you pay your rent, anytime you go to the nail shop, you're paying that tax. So it generates a whole ton of revenue for the state because our visitors actually wind up paying a good chunk of that. About a third of our revenues comes from our state's income tax. And the fact that we're over reliant on this GET becomes even more of an issue because of recent changes to our income tax law that took place 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, the legislature passed Act 46. They unleashed a massive sprawling change to the state's income tax on the last day of conference committee with no input from advocates, the public, even their fellow legislators, and essentially forced the governor's hand to sign this massive tax cut that the way it's structured is it adjusts our tax brackets out over the next 5 years. And they've done it in a way that keeps people who would be higher income, that would be paying higher tax rates into lower tax brackets. So really limits the amount of revenue that we can raise through the income tax and then further increases our reliance on that flat regressive tax of the GET. So we were able to get some great analysis on the tax cut from ITEP. No big surprise, the top 1% are getting a huge benefit from this, around $12,000 on average when fully implemented in 2032. And then, of course, at the bottom percent, we're seeing very meager benefits of around $400 on average. The total cost of this is going to be about $7.5 billion over the implementation period. And then once fully implemented in 2032, it's going to cost another $1.5 billion annually. If we could go to the next slide, please, you can get more of a graphic illustration of how this looks in terms of income category. So, it's pretty stark, right? You'll see in the first year of the tax cut being implemented, the top 1% are seeing a savings of $6,000. And then by the time fully implemented, that almost doubles to a little over $12,000. Compare that to the bottom 20%, where you're seeing just around 330 something dollars in savings and only increasing by, about $100 once fully implemented. So this, don't have to, belabor the point to you all, causes a big structural headache for us here in Hawaii, especially when we take into account all of the fallout from HR 1 and the full-on retreat that the federal government is undertaking from our public benefit system. We go to the next slide, please. Here you can see the cost of what this is going to cost us over the years as the tax cut is fully implemented. This is simply not sustainable, and we have been messaging this since the tax cut was passed in 2024. And we were largely ignored. No one wanted to listen to this because I think the legislature was collectively patting themselves on the back for passing a politically popular tax cut, which helped many of them get reelected. But I think a lot of them are starting to change their tunes, including our governor, who actually signed this act into law 2 years ago, which is a good sign. So that means we really need to think about, in light of all of these federal changes, in light of the structural change at the state level, what is it that we can do here locally on the ground in Hawaii, to make sure that we have the resources to invest in our people and our public benefit system. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the upcoming work that we've got going on for 2026. So here, this is a very short list of our revenue priorities. I had to actually leave out quite a bit in the interest of time, but I wanted to just highlight a few of them. So if we could go to the next slide, please. All right. So first and foremost, we need to absolutely address this massive tax cut. So we have been in talks with legislative leadership on the House side. We've also been talking to the governor's office. And really what we're looking to do now is to just freeze the implementation of the tax cut right now so that we can hopefully stop that bleeding. The standard deduction increases, we would prefer if those were to continue to increase because those are the most beneficial for the low income population. But we want to work to scale back if we can some of the cuts at the higher end of the spectrum. Obviously, this would result in some immediate savings in the first year, but I think most importantly, this would keep our costs from ballooning to that 1.5 billion annually once it's fully implemented in 2032. So this one is really kind of the centerpiece of our tax advocacy this year. We need to resolve this really deep structural issue first, but this also provides an opportunity for us to message other progressive revenue opportunities. So we are going to be working with our partners to forward as many of these as we possibly can this session in the hopes that we can really start a conversation about what raising revenue in Hawaii looks like. So using the adjustments to Act 46 to open that window to have deeper conversations on some other issues. So real quick, I just want to talk about some of those other ones that we have on deck. If we could go to the next slide, please. Taxing capital gains like regular income. This has been a priority of ours for a number of years. Last year, we actually got some traction on this where a less good version of it actually crossed over from the House to the Senate, made it to the Senate floor, but then was recommitted to committee on the floor on the last day of the session. We're still a little confused as to how that actually went down, so more digging needs to be done on that. But essentially, here in Hawaii, our top capital gains rate is 7.25%, although our top income tax rate is 11%. And we know that the vast majority of people that have earnings from capital gains are falling in that 11% category. So we think they should be taxed at the same rate as their income from wages. So we have a range of revenue estimates that we could raise from this. If we just simply raised it to 9%, that's the one that actually made it to the Senate floor last year. We could raise an additional $44 million. But if we close the loophole, this could raise on the conservative side, $85 million annually, up to somewhere around $130 million, depending on, how capital gains are doing at the time. So this is going to continue to be a priority for us and our coalition partners. But there are a couple of other new ideas coming up that I wanted to share that we're going to be running point on during the legislative session. So we could go to the next slide, please. All right, let me go through this very quickly. The conveyance tax reform, this is a tax levied on the sale of homes. Right now, this is not a marginal rate structure. So as soon as you go a dollar value over in your limit, you're going into a higher tax bracket. So we've been working with the House Housing Chair to reform this tax. And what we really want to do is really ratchet up the rate on non-owner occupied investment properties. This would allow us to hopefully reduce the tax burden on some of those lower value homes that we know that are being purchased by local families. We're also interested in seeing if we can dedicate some of those revenues to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands to construct housing for Native Hawaiians. I'm out of time, but maybe we can just go real quick. The next slide. Wealth proceeds tax. Hey, everybody loves wealth proceeds tax, right? Where are my people from ITEP? I know you're on the call. Thank you very much. We have some interest from one of our newly elected progressive legislators. As soon as he found out about this tax, got really excited. Bill is drafted. We are really looking forward to having the conversation about that tax this coming session. And then lastly, can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So essentially, what we have decided that we are going to do in order to forward these proposals is to relaunch our Tax Fairness Coalition. This coalition was organized a few years back, mainly to push for the creation of a state level EITC. We won that campaign, and then our tax coalition really fell apart. We saw attendance really start to die off. But because of the political moment we're in, we are seeing partners coming out of the woodwork saying, what are we going to do on taxes? This is the first time I have seen in a very long time that people here on the ground in Hawaii want to talk about taxes. They want to talk about how we can embrace progressive revenue to fund our services. And it's because of the political moment that we find ourselves in. So we want to harness that energy, reform with our partners. We're having our official campaign launch on Saturday at Kaumakapili Church in Kalihi. And it's going to be an opportunity for us to bring community together, to bring advocates together with legislators together, have a party atmosphere. I was very adamant that we are not going to do a press conference at the Capitol with our signs that's poorly attended, and just have legislative staffers looking down on us from the rail, gawking at us. I said, no, we're going to have an event that's rooted in community for community, and we can all celebrate this movement for progressive taxation in Hawaii. So, really excited to embark on this work. Our opening day of the legislature was yesterday. Bills are going to be dropping nonstop over the next few days. So, more to come on our tax fights, and hope to give you guys an update at the end of our session. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Excited to hear about the party and love the path for long-term revenue raising, multiple revenue raisers that you're offering to all of us. Thank you. To close out, just one last huge thank you to Will and Nadeska and Andrew for sharing the insights from your states and the inspirational work you're leading. And just a flag that SRA's next monthly meeting is February 26th. This is an event co-hosted with SIX, the State Innovation Exchange, focused more on a messaging training and particularly addressing the myth of wealth flight. So that's open to our network of SRA partners, but also legislators and legislative staff. And then additionally, we've got some new resources coming your way around data and early session comms toolkit and an updated candidate guide. So thank you all so much for joining today, and looking forward to connecting in the coming weeks. Take care.